Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be traveling back into the fictitious world of the late 1800s with Lady Mechanika number 4. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in February of 2015, this is cover A of this book. There are many covers to this issue. Sadly, I have but 3 of them, though I can say none of them are really bad. This is actually a really cool cover that is depicting an outfit that Mechanika has to wear for a mission that she's going to be undertaking in this very issue. And what's odd is that this is cover A, but the sketch cover variant of it is actually cover C. And we're going to look at that right now. Now, as I stated, cover C is indeed a black and white variation of cover A. However, I do want to commend Joe Benitez in the fact that he took the time to, instead of just making it a pure black and white image of cover A, he did try to go the extra mile and make it feel a little bit more unique by giving it the illusion of being an etching on parchment. You can see a lot of the line work detail used for the shading in Mechanika's wings and outfit. And you can also see that around the border of the cover, he added in frayed edges to make it look like a very old and weathered piece of parchment. It's very subtle, but I appreciate the fact that he tried to make it stand out a little bit and not just feel like a straight up black and white version of the original cover. And surprisingly, neither cover A nor cover C look anything like cover B, which we're about to look at right now. And here we have cover B, which looks nothing like cover A whatsoever. And I gotta be honest, I really like this cover a lot better than cover A. Not that I have any problem with cover A, it's very well done. But this cover just seems to pop more. It's got more color to it. I like that there's also more going on with the background where we have some weapons and some late 1800s steam machinery behind her. We also see Mechanika in a quote-unquote sexy outfit, but this is just a ruse as she's also armed to the teeth, concealing a pistol underneath her dress attached to her garter belt. And we also see one of her mechanical arms fully exposed, which is something that you don't get a lot of in the comic book. I really gotta say, of the two, this is my favorite. Unfortunately, there's 4 other covers to this issue that I don't have and hope to acquire one day, but I wouldn't hold my breath on how long it's going to take me to do that. Created, written, and drawn by Joe Benitez. Colors by Peter Steigerwall and Mike Garcia. Letters by Josh Reed. Special thanks to M2. We can see down here that, of course, as I stated and already showed, I have covers A, B, and C, but there's also covers D, E, F, and G. And the likelihood of me coming across any of these 4 covers is pretty slim to begin with, as they weren't printed in high numbers. And one in particular, you had to jump through some real hoops to get to, and I'm going to explain that in greater detail when we get further into the book. When we rejoin our heroes, we are picking up exactly where the story left off in issue number 3, with Lord Blackpool unveiling his brand new state-of-the-art, most impressive airship on Earth, the HelioArk. Unfortunately, this thing is an absolute monstrosity. I think it looks amazing. It's beautifully drawn by Joe Benitez, but the design is completely absurd. The idea that something such as this could ever maintain any kind of buoyancy in air or even water, as it's most likely designed to land on water to allow passengers on and off, it seems absurd. Like, nothing about this seems as though it could ever get off the ground or maintain afloat or even hold up under its own weight. The structural rigidity of this is very questionable at best. This is definitely one of those rule of cool things, because the moment you try to apply physics or gravity or aerodynamics or buoyancy to this thing, it just falls apart completely. But hey, it's comic books, folks. It's supposed to look awesome, and it does. So we get back into Lord Blackpool's speech as he goes on and on about how wonderful his new state-of-the-art airship is, exclaiming that it can house 3,000 occupants. It has multiple grand banquet halls. It has libraries. It has a shopping center. And he is very much trying to build up to the crowd just what an impressive feat of technology the Helio Arc truly is. Meanwhile, we see that Lewis and Mechanika are watching this and not really paying attention to Blackpool's speech. And Lewis even brings up, Blackpool, he doesn't do this kind of stuff just for the sake of building something super grand. He's got, other things going on, and that this thing is probably quite well armed. Mechanika agrees and asks what his point is. Lewis says his point is that he knows for a fact Mechanika wants to get on board the Helio Arc, and he's worried about how difficult that's going to be given the armaments that are certainly being used to guard it. Mechanika confirms that she does in fact plan on getting onto the Helio Arc because she needs to investigate, and it's the only place that she's going to be able to find the evidence that she needs to figure out what exactly led to the death of the mechanical girl in the train station whose body that she failed to recover. Meanwhile, we see that Dr. Littleton and his daughter are quite enamored by the Helio Arc as they both speak about how grand it is and how they believe it's one of the most impressive machines they've ever seen. As Lord Blackpool continues his speech, he wraps up by stating that there's going to be a masquerade ball held in the grand ballroom on the Helio Arc. And of course, this is going to be by invitation only, which means our heroes are not going to be able to just stroll right on board. However, Mechanika sees that this is the opportunity she needs, as the ball itself will provide the distraction and cover she needs to investigate further on the Helio Arc. However, Lewis asks how she intends on getting in, given that she doesn't have an invitation. She exclaims that she'll figure it out and that Lewis is going to help her. Meanwhile, Alexandra asks her father if they can go to the masquerade ball, and Dr. Littleton tells her that he is by no means important enough to have been invited, which Mechanika overhears and states that she's disappointed as she was hoping that perhaps she could get an invitation through him. But Littleton is surprised that Mechanika doesn't have an invitation herself, given her level of fame and notoriety throughout the city. However, she exclaims that this is not something that she would ever be privy to, and that despite her notoriety throughout the city, she's not anywhere close to famous enough to get an invitation to an event like this. And Alexandra seems to agree far too quickly as she steps away. Her father asks why exactly she's leaving, and she says because she doesn't want to be near this imposter. And this, of course, shocks her father, and he quickly apologizes to Lady Mechanika. He then walks over to his daughter and yells at her, exclaiming that she must go back right away and apologize to Lady Mechanika for insulting her. We then get an advertisement for JoeBenitez.com, where we can see that you can buy prints and variant covers, as we see 2 of the variant covers for this very issue are shown in this advertisement. This is because the only way to get some of the variant covers for any of the issues for Lady Mechanika were through JoeBenitez.com directly, which is why I don't have them, because at this time, I either overlooked it or was just short on funds, as I had far less disposable income back in 2015. Getting back to the story, Alexandra once again proclaims that this is not the real Lady Mechanika, and she is in fact an imposter. Her father argues with her, stating that he can absolutely verify this is the true Lady Mechanika, but Alexandra exclaims that she can prove that it isn't with a simple test. She then approaches Lady Mechanika and states that she is going to ask her a simple question that only the real Lady Mechanika would know. She asks her the question, what color was the blade on the dagger that she used to slay Silica, the evil swamp hag from Hell's Hound Hollow? Now, Mechanika, of course, has absolutely no idea what she's talking about, and once again, Alexandra reiterates the question. At this point, Mechanika just simply states, I have no idea. And at this point, we see that Alexandra believes this confirms her suspicions that this is indeed an imposter and not the true Lady Mechanika. She excuses herself and says good day. Once again, Mechanika tries to apologize for disappointing her, but Alexandra cuts her off and states, I said good day. Dr. Littleton turns very embarrassed and apologizes once again as he chases after his daughter as she leaves through the crowd. And as they're walking away, Lewis, under his breath, states, "Crimson." And Mechanika's like, "Wait, what?" Lewis goes on to explain that the dagger's blade was crimson because it was forged from dragon's blood. Mechanika looks at him and states, "Funny, I haven't heard that one yet." And Lewis tells her it was actually okay. They're, of course, referring to one of the many dime store novels that has been written about Mechanika. Of course, all of these little novels are 100% fictitious and just made up by the authors. However, this is the source of all the quote-unquote facts that Alexandra has about the real Lady Mechanika, which is why she's completely off base in all of her assumptions. However, at this point, their conversation is interrupted by a familiar voice who states, "Is this Lord Blackpool the one that is in possession of my daughter, and is she aboard this helioarch?" This voice, of course, belongs to Gaetano, the knife thrower from the Romani circus. And while Mechanika is, in fact, trying to work with him, she doesn't necessarily trust him. And she also hasn't yet informed him that his daughter has died. So she explains to Gaetano that she believes his daughter was in fact held aboard the helioarch at one time, but is no longer there. She then tries to get him to go back to the circus as she doesn't want him interfering with her investigation. However, Gaetano states that since Serafina is in fact his daughter, he wants to help out and aid in any way he can, as it's his responsibility to protect her as her father. At this point, Mechanika decides to try and let him down gently, as she states she believes that his daughter has died at this point and that she's very sorry. Of course, she doesn't fully confirm to him that she has already seen his daughter's body, but this again is a means of trying to let him down gently, as she doesn't want to crush his spirits. However, Gaetano responds by stating that as long as Lady Divinity proclaims that Serafina is still alive, it means that she is still on this plane and that he can help find her. However, Mechanika once again declines, stating that she best works alone, and Gaetano tries to once again weasel his way into the mission, stating that his talents could be useful to her. And while Mechanika does agree that he is quite a formidable individual, she doesn't believe he's well suited for this mission, as it's going to require a softer touch, a very stealthy approach. Gaetano exclaims that she might be surprised at what he can do, but at this point, Mechanika fully refuses his offer, stating that he needs to return back to the circus with his family, and that she will report in with any information that she gains about his daughter and also Angelo, who is missing from the circus as well. We then see Mechanika and Lewis stroll away, as Lewis asks Mechanika exactly why she won't accept Gaetano's help, as he is pretty talented and he might be useful. But Mechanika tells Lewis that she doesn't trust Gaetano, or anyone from the circus for that matter, as she knows for a fact they're hiding something from her, but she doesn't know what that is. She then tells Lewis that he needs to get everything ready because they're going to sneak aboard the ship later that evening. Of course, Lewis is not too happy about this, as he doesn't like putting himself or Mechanika in danger. As they walk away, Gaetano is actually quite frustrated and angry, and he calls Mechanika an insolent Gaji, and then tells his monkey Napoleon that they're going to be working on their own, it seems. Meanwhile, aboard the helioarch, we are once again joined with Commander Winter. She is in the medical bay receiving the final touches on her new mechanical limbs, which are replacing the ones that she lost in her most recent battle with Lady Mechanika. She tells the doctor that she is still experiencing some pain, but more importantly, severely limited mobility. The doctor tells her that this final injection should clear that up. And Commander Winter asks, have you injected that elixir into any other subjects, any human subjects? The doctor says, yes, there was one, and it did splendidly well. However, Commander Winter is not too convinced, as she asks, oh really, just one subject? But the doctor tells her that this subject had far more mechanical implants placed in his body than hers, and he suffered no problems. She then tries to ask, well, how come you haven't tried this out more often with more test subjects? And he explains to her it's because the elixir is in very short supply and they only have one tiny vial of it. He then tells her that the subject Seraphina had trace elements of this elixir in her blood and that he could use some of her blood to potentially synthesize a replacement for it. However, being that she is now gone and that well has run dry, this is now an impossibility. However, upon hearing this, Commander Winter tells him that she will find him another test subject, and it doesn't sound as though it's going to be very nice for said test subject. Meanwhile, later that evening, we see that Mechanika and Lewis are making their approach to the Helio Ark in Lewis's flying car contraption thing, which looks about as aeronautically sound as the Helio Ark itself. He tells Mechanika that he's actually not too pleased about her going alone and that he worries for her safety. However, Mechanika states that he has nothing to worry about, she's going to be fine, and that she's actually worried about whether or not his winged contraption is going to work. He tells her that's the one thing she need not worry about, as the Lewis wing will work perfectly and get her safely aboard the Helio Ark. She tells him it better as she jumps off of his flying car and dives straight at the Helio Ark. She presses the button to activate the Lewis wing and nothing happens. This, of course, terrifies her as she realizes that she is falling quickly into what could be her doom if this machine does not work. She begins to frantically click the button again and again, and finally the Lewis wing opens in the nick of time. Mechanika then glides safely onto the top of the Helio Ark and begins to think to herself that perhaps she could have brought Lewis along, and seeing as how he used to be employed by Blackpool, he might have even been useful as he would have known some of the protocols, even if his information was outdated. Unfortunately for Mechanika, the Lewis wing is catching some very strong gusts of wind, and it knocks her down onto a lower deck that she hadn't been trying to get onto. As she gets to her feet, she realizes that she's standing directly in front of one of Blackpool's guards, who asks her who she is and what she's doing here. She responds by stating, do you happen to know how to swim?" as we see her kick the man in the chest and knock him off the side of the Helio Ark as he falls to the water below. She goes on to think to herself that she actually quite likes Lewis, and despite the fact that she does get annoyed with him just randomly showing up to her home unannounced, that she does actually appreciate his company. She then thinks that all she has to do now is avoid detection and everything should be fine. Unfortunately, when she turns around, there's another man standing right there as he states, "May I help you?" And she says, "Well, perhaps, do you know how to swim?" And then she throws him off the side as well, which is kind of hilarious because I don't even think this guy was one of Blackpool's men. I think he was just there for the ball. And also, I find it kind of hilarious that it's being implied that these guys are going to be okay as she's just knocking them off the Helio Ark into the water. In reality, they are hovering well above the surface of the bay, and these men were most likely killed on impact with the surface of the water from such a great height. As she makes her way into the internals of the ship, she begins to look around and try to figure out exactly how she can not only get inside, but also blend in with the partygoers, as she's not exactly sure where she needs to go from here or where she needs to continue her investigation. We then get an advertisement for Legendary Vampirella #1, as well as some ads for the Red Sonja Legendary and the Green Hornet Legendary. For those of you who don't know, Legendary was a series produced by Dynamite, which took many of the characters that it was publishing at the time and put them into a Victorian-era steampunk world. Conceptually, it was a really cool idea. Unfortunately, I didn't think it was executed very well. I have like the first couple of issues of Legendary, and the story was okay, and the artwork was honestly kind of lackluster, quite frankly. It's not really something I got into, which is unfortunate because I really wanted to like it. I just didn't. And I'll be honest, while Joe Benitez did the cover here for Vampirella, Red Sonja, and Green Hornet, and they all look amazing, the interior artwork was nowhere even close to the standard that we see here in Lady Mechanika. Getting back to the story, we see that Mechanika is slowly creeping throughout the ship, trying to find a way inside, as she climbs up on the exterior and looks into a window where she sees a woman in her suite getting ready for the ball. Mechanika makes her way into the woman's room somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, because it seems as though this window would not open, and politely asks the woman if she can borrow her outfit for the evening. The woman screams and Mechanika knocks her unconscious. She then puts on the woman's clothes and opens a small box that she brought along with her, which contains 2 glass contact lenses. These are, of course, to hide her glowing red eyes. Unfortunately, while these do actually help her blend in and not seem in any way abnormal, they don't work long term, in the sense that they actually limit her vision and are actually quite uncomfortable to wear for more than a few minutes at a time. However, she is thankful to Lewis for creating them, especially given the fact that he only did so by happening to overhear her complaining about how she has trouble blending into crowds, especially if they can see her eyes, and he was actually quite drunk at the time. So she's really surprised he even remembered to do this in the first place. We then see Mechanika enter the ballroom wearing the outfit that she is depicted in on the cover of issue number 3. Now, I find this kind of surprising. I don't know if this was perhaps a mistake and that cover was supposed to be one of the variants for this issue, or if in fact it was planned that they would use an image from what would be the 4th issue for the cover of issue number 3, though that seems odd. Of course, these are all just speculations. I have no way to confirm any of this. Mechanika thinks to herself that she's quite grateful for the lenses that Lewis made her. Despite their limitations, they do help her blend into large crowds like this. She looks down upon the ballroom below and is then approached by a man wearing a mask who states, "Finally, you're here. You're very late. I thought you weren't even going to come." Mechanika tries to backtrack and states, "Sir, you have me confused with someone else." However, he approaches quickly, grabs her hand and kisses it, and then she realizes that this is in fact Gitano. She asks how on earth he was able to get aboard, and he very quickly pulls out of his pocket and holds up an invitation, and he says, "Easy, I got an invitation. That's how I got on." He then tells her that he's been exploring the ship and that the only thing he can find is that on level 13, all passengers are barred from going there, and there is a locked door that is guarded by 2 men, and that must be the one place that they need to investigate to find what they need, because there's nothing else on board that seems out of place. It's at this point that Mechanika realizes that she has in fact underestimated the abilities of Gitano and apologizes to him for not taking him more seriously before. However, Gitano states that he doesn't want an apology. He wants her to help him find his daughter. Of course, Mechanika realizes that he's right. They need to get to work. But then Gitano looks over and notices that his monkey Napoleon seems to be getting rather excited and drawing a crowd. He goes to retrieve him and walks up behind a young woman and states that he's sorry if his monkey is bothering her. However, when the woman turns around, he finds out that this is actually none other than Arlequin, his other daughter. This enrages Gitano, as he tells her it's too dangerous for her to be here. However, Arlequin argues that she couldn't just wait at home while her sisters Serafina and Angelo were both in danger, and that she felt she needed to come and help in any way that she could. We then get an advertisement for a Nightwing resin model kit from Prototypes with a Z Studio.com. I have never seen anything from Prototypes Studio. I have no idea if any of this was any good. I do not recall ever coming across any of their products. It does look really cool in this ad, so hopefully they were high quality. If you have any experience with any of their model kits, feel free to talk about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more about them and if they still exist and if they're any good. We then get an advertisement for the Zoo Hunters from Aspen Comics. I'll be honest, I do not recall this comic ever existing. I don't believe I've ever seen it before other than in this ad, and I know nothing about it. If you do, feel free to talk to me about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more about it, know if it was any good, and what your experiences with reading it may have been. But, I'm not surprised I've never seen it before. When it comes to Aspen Comics, there's basically Fathom and then the whole rest of their catalog. And generally speaking, Fathom was the only one of their books you were ever going to readily find in most comic book stores. Getting back to the story, as Mechanika waits for Gitano to return, she is approached by another man wearing a plague doctor-esque mask. He strikes up conversation with her, telling her how much he loves masquerades, because you never know who you may be talking to. He then looks at Mechanika and states, "You may be some ruthless villain or a grand adventurer under that mask." This actually stuns Mechanika as she asks, "Wait, how did you..." But before she can finish that question, he interrupts her, looking down at her chest, stating, "Oh my, what a peculiar pendant that is. Does it have some sort of religious significance, or is it some sort of an heirloom of sorts?" This also seems like a really creative way of staring at her cleavage. Maybe, but let's try and, take him at his word that he actually was caught off guard by this very unique pendant that she wears. Mechanika then goes on to explain that the pendant once belonged to someone very close to her, someone that she hasn't seen in many years but hopes to see once again. The mysterious man tells her that he is quite positive that she will be reunited with this person again, and as long as she holds her faith, her prayers will be answered. He then begins to ask if she'll have a dance with him when they're interrupted by Gitano, who states that he is sorry to have kept her waiting, and then thanks the mysterious man for keeping her company and exclaims he is a true gentleman. The man tells Gitano that the pleasure was all his, and then asks if he could perhaps have a dance with Lady Mechanika later that evening. She obliges and politely says yes, he may perhaps have one indeed. As she and Gitano walk away from the man, Gitano asks who that man was, and Mechanika tells him she's not certain who he was at all, that he was probably just some nobleman being kind to her. As they continue to make their way through the crowd, Gitano tells her that there is a complication because Arlequin has made her way on board. Mechanika immediately scolds Arlequin, telling her this is no place for a child, but Arlequin states that she had to try and come and help her sister and Angelo. Then Mechanika asks, "Wait a minute, how did you get on board?" And Arlequin tells her, "Well, I just stole an invitation." At this point, Mechanika is rather irritated as she realizes that she could have gotten aboard this ship far easier than she did, but states that at this point it doesn't matter as they make their way to Deck 13. Down on Deck 13, we see the two guards arguing about how good a shot the one is, as he claims to have shot an apple off the top of a fence at 400 yards with his rifle. The other man does not believe him at all, and they begin to have a wager between the two of them. However, their conversation is interrupted by none other than Napoleon the monkey. The two men get a kick out of this joyful little jester-dressed monkey as he begins to climb all over the one. The other one laughs and states, "Oh, he likes you." However, at this point, Napoleon grabs his helmet and starts to run away. As the guard chases Napoleon and tries to get his helmet back, the other guard laughs and states, "That's it, give him a good run for his money." However, there's a loud thunk, and at this point, the other guard starts to become suspicious as he calls out to his friend and says, "Hey, are you all right?" As the second guard rounds the corner to investigate, he is shocked when he sees our heroes armed to the teeth, and Mechanika stating, "I suppose you're not going to make this any harder than it needs to be, are you?" The man obliges, and moments later, our heroes are inside of Blackpool's laboratory. They're stunned at what they see as Gitano asks, "What kind of unholy place is this?" Arlequin looks around and asks if the subjects are still alive, and Mechanika states that she believes some of them are, as a cat with a mechanical limb jumps up into her arms. Gitano then asks, "Is this what was done to my dear daughter Serafina?" And Mechanika tells him that she's positive it was, but she doesn't know as to why it was done to her, and that's why she's investigating. She wants to know exactly what the motivation for giving the mechanical arms to Serafina really was. We then get an advertisement for 4-color grails. Now, most of you watching this probably have no idea what 4-color grails is, and there's good reason for that. The company only existed for 6 months. It was a colossal failure. It was basically Loot Crate. Remember Loot Crate? I do, unfortunately. Now, Despite Loot Crate being somewhat successful and lasting for several years, they also no longer exist. Probably because people collectively realize that spending 30 to whatever amount of dollars per month on a box of random crap that showed up on your door only so that you could open it up later on and realize that you didn't want 80% of what was in the box was a huge waste of money. Well, Four Color Grails tried to do the exact same thing, except specifically with variant covers of comic books. Remember when I said earlier in the video that you had to jump through some hoops to get your hands on all of the variant covers for this issue? One of those hoops, the biggest one, was getting a subscription to Four Color Grails, because guaranteed in the first ever box they shipped was cover G of this issue of Lady Mechanika. So that's right, folks. The only way that you could get your hands on the G variant cover of this issue was to buy a box from Four Color Grails. Now, granted, you did get 3 other comics in there as well, but that meant you spent $30 to essentially get one comic you knew you wanted and 3 other comics that who the hell knew what those were going to be. There was also a 3-month subscription you could do, which dropped the price to $27 a month. And I guess, sure, you're saving $9 overall, but that's not including the shipping and handling fees, which you did have to pay. So realistically, you would have wound up spending probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 for 12 comic books and not had a single say in what 11 of them even were. It's not a good idea. And I think people immediately realized it was not a good idea, which is why this company went out of business so quickly. Getting back to the story, we see that Lady Mechanika finds a ledger, and inside of it, she starts to read and realize that Serafina was having her blood drawn in regular intervals. She then looks over at Gaetano and asks why on earth this would have been happening and what's so special about her blood. She then asks Gaetano, "What is it that you're hiding from me?" Gaetano finally decides to come clean with her and tells her that there's a legend about his family and that their blood is very special and that they share blood with that of the angel Ramel and that his blood runs through their veins. This, of course, is something that shocks Mechanika as she states, "Wait a minute, an angel?" And Gaetano states, "Yes, there are many who believe it, even though it is a folktale." Mechanika responds by stating, "But do you believe it?" However, at this point, the two of them are interrupted when Arlequin shouts, "Angelo, I found Angelo." Both Mechanika and Gaetano tell Arlequin to be careful as Angelo may be changed. However, at this point, it's too late as Arlequin is already opening the door to Angelo's cell. Gaetano states that she shouldn't have done that, but Arlequin tells him, "No, this is where Angelo's at. His name was on the door. We have to free him." And before the scolding can continue, they are interrupted when a clank hits the floor as we see a large spike-like thing. And we realize that Angelo may not be who they once knew and that this might be a sticky situation. We then get a 2-page splash where it is confirmed that this was in fact Angelo. However, he is not at all the man they once knew, as he has been completely overhauled into a mechanical monster, and the only human part of him that seems to be left is in fact his head. Now, of course, this is the test subject that the doctor earlier in the comic who was working with Commander Winter was speaking about when he was talking about using the elixir. And unfortunately, it seems like not only his body is gone, but also his humanity as he lets out a loud moan. And we see that the story is to be concluded in issue number 5. And on the final page of the book, along with the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Lady Mechanika and the Tablet of Destinies. This is the next miniseries in the Lady Mechanika story, and while there is a bit of a blurb and little information given about it, I'm not going to go into detail about that because I don't want to spoil any of the story, as I do have this miniseries and will be making videos on it in the future. But as you can see, it continues the multiple covers aesthetic, and also we get a few looks at some interior artwork. It's very much in the same vein as this story. If you like Lady Mechanika, which I do, you're going to like this just as much as you liked the original series. So stay tuned because we will be getting to it in the future. And that was Lady Mechanika #4. And overall, I think it was a really good issue. I really like the way that they got everyone onto the Helio arc and jokingly made fun of Mechanika for doing it in the most difficult possible way. I also like that she's being forced to work with other people so that the story's not too heavily focused on her exclusively. I think the character of Gaetano is really cool, and I was glad to see him come back in this issue. And it's also nice to see that they incorporated his other daughter, showing the family dynamic that they have and why it's so important for them to find out what happened to Serafina and why they're so concerned with her well-being. The only real disappointment I have with any of this book is the very sobering realization that there's almost no possibility that I'm ever going to get my hands on those other variant covers. Several of them being exclusive to Joe Benitez's website. So how many of those are in circulation? And then the one that's exclusive to a dumb knockoff Loot Crate that only existed for 6 months. So, how many of those are floating around? Maybe 100 if I'm lucky? What are the chances I'm going to find those anywhere ever? And how much is it going to cost? These are questions that I face every day and what keep me awake at night in my nightmares. I'm joking, folks, but in all reality, I thought this was a fantastic book. I liked the story. I liked everything about it, the artwork. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may not have liked any of those things. You may have thought that the story wasn't really progressing in the way that you believe it should have. You may not be a fan of Joe Benitez's artwork. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.